Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into one of the most complex annual jurisprudential challenges facing Muslims living in North America. We're talking about participation in Thanksgiving.
Mm. And it's a topic that lands squarely in what you could call a liminal space.
A gray area.
Exactly. It has, these undeniably religious Puritan roots, but today it functions almost entirely as a secular national holiday. It's about family, food, football.
And that tension is really why this is such a vital deep dive, because Thanksgiving becomes this critical litmus test for a much bigger debate in Western Islamic law.
It really does. On one hand, you have this principle of time use, the need to maintain a distinct religious and cultural identity,
And on the other,
the push for indimage or, positive social integration into the society you live in.
so the stakes are way higher than just what's on the dinner table. The mission for the jurists, then, is to figure out what category this day even falls into.
That's the whole game. Is Thanksgiving a religious festival and Eid dini, which would make it subject to really strict prohibitions?
Or is it just a customary occasion, a munashaba adiyah, which would, put it under the general rule that worldly matters are basically permissible?
And that answer changes everything. So we've synthesized the three main streams of Sunni thought here: the prohibitionists, the contextualists, and a newer group, the ethical objectors, to show you just how differently they tackle this.
Okay, let's jump right in with the strictest view, the prohibitionist school. This approach is often associated with Salafi, or traditional Deobandi thought.
Right. And they frame the entire discussion around one thing: preserving a pure and exclusive Islamic identity.
And their entire case is built on what?
It rests almost entirely on one specific text, the very famous Hadith of Imitation, which states, "Whoever imitates a people."
Is one of them.
Exactly. For scholars like the Saudi Permanent Committee or figures from Darul Uloom Deoband, participating in Thanksgiving is a clear act of tashabbuh, of imitation.
But how do they define imitation when you're just talking about turkey and, watching a parade? These aren't exactly Christian rituals.
They define it by its origin and its function as a cultural symbol. They see Thanksgiving as a shi'ar, a distinguishing mark of a non-Muslim nation.
So participating is a form of allegiance.
A prohibited form of allegiance, or wala, yes. They argue it's a step towards assimilation that could weaken the Muslim community's integrity.
And this is where that respect for tradition really comes in. They argue that even if it feels secular today, the ruling is locked in by its religious beginning. Is that right?
Precisely. They use a legal principle called istishab. It basically means the origin remains. So, since Thanksgiving started as a Puritan religious feast,
It stays a religious feast in the eyes of the law, no matter how many people celebrate it secularly.
that's their argument. The secularization doesn't change the original verdict. So while a contextualist might say your intention changes things, a prohibitionist says the origin is fixed.
That is a huge legal gap between the two.
A massive one. And on top of that, they look at the very idea of having a recurring annual celebration that isn't one of our two Eids. They point to the hadith where the Prophet arrives in Medina.
And he replaced their local pagan festivals with Eid al-Fit and Eid al-Adha.
Right. And the prohibitionists look at the word he used, abdalakum. He has replaced for you, as meaning a total cancellation, a prohibition of all other recurring festivals.
So for them, the two Eids are exclusive. Adding a third, even a cultural one, is challenging the completeness of the religion.
That is their core theological position, yes.
Yeah.
And to really drive that point home, they often cite the Quranic warning against, seeking the approval of other communities.
You mean the verse from Surah Al-Baqarah?
The very one. And never will the Jews or the Christians be pleased with you until you follow their religion. They frame participating in Thanksgiving as a step on that path, a kind of theological dilution.
But I think the most powerful textual proof they bring, the one that really seems to seal the deal for them, is about witnessing falsehood.
Yes, from Surah Al-Furqan. And they are those who do not testify to falsehood. Now, the key here is the classical interpretation, the tafsir.
What did the early commentators say?
Well, major figures like Ibn Kathir, citing early scholars like Tawus and Ibn Sirin, said that falsehood, Al-Zoor, in this verse specifically meant the festivals of the polytheists.
Wait, so for this school, just being there isn't just a bad idea, it's a direct violation of a Quranic command.
That is precisely their conclusion. For the prohibitionist school, the evidence is stacked. It's imitation, it violates the exclusivity of the Eids, and it's witnessing falsehood. The holiday is an Eid dini. End of story.
Okay, so if that's the firm identity first line, what's the alternative? How do the majority of Muslims in the West who feel this pull towards family and community navigate this? This is where the contextualists come in.
Right, and we're talking about scholars from major organizations like AMJA, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, and the Fiqh Council of North America. They completely shift the focus
Away from history and imitation and towards what?
towards the universal intent of the practice itself. Their priority is shukr, gratitude, and social integration, as long as you're avoiding clear-cut religious rites.
And they find support for that directly in the Quran.
Absolutely. The Quran is filled with verses on gratitude.
Hmm.
And be grateful to me and do not deny me. Or in Surah Al-Furqan, where gratitude is linked directly to wisdom, to hikmah.
So the argument is, if the whole point of the day is to stop and thank God for your blessings, that's a fundamentally Islamic act.
It is. So if the holiday helps you do that on a societal level, and it doesn't involve any polytheism or shirk, then it actually aligns with the goals of Islam.
Which brings us back to that legal classification. If it's not a forbidden religious festival, what is it?
It's a permissible local custom, an urf. They apply a huge legal maxim, al-ada muhakama, custom is the basis of judgment. And they lean on an even broader principle.
Let me guess. Al-asil fi al-atsha al-ibaha.
You got it. The default ruling for worldly matters is permissibility.
And that just flips the whole script. It shifts the burden of proof. The default is that it's okay, and you need hard evidence to forbid it.
Exactly. And that allows them to apply another concept, taki al-manan, which means you have to verify the reality on the ground today.
So how has the reality changed?
Well, scholars like Dr. Yasir Qadi argue that the prohibition on imitation was about distinctly religious rituals. But eating turkey is now a common custom, a mushtarak thing.
Meaning everyone does it?
Everyone. Atheists, Jews, Hindus, Christians. Since it's no longer exclusive to one religion, it loses its power as a distinguishing religious mark, that shi'ar. The reality has changed, so the ruling can change.
And this has massive practical implications, especially for converts to Islam.
The convert conundrum is a huge factor here. Scholars like Imam Suhaib Webb talk about the maqsada, the real harm, of telling a new Muslim they have to boycott their family's biggest annual dinner.
Because severing family ties, Silat Ar-Rahim, is a major sin.
A major sin. So the contextualists prioritize the maslahah, the public good, of keeping families together. They see the dinner as a social tool, not a religious rite.
And at the end of the day, just sharing the food is already permitted, right?
Yes, that's a simple, reassuring point. Institutions like Dar al-Ifta in Egypt point to Surah Al-Ma'idah, which explicitly allows us to eat the food of the people of the book. So sharing a meal is fine, as long as it's, halal, no pork or alcohol.
So the entire debate really does just hinge on one question. Is the default prohibition, or is the default permissibility?
It's a head-to-head collision of legal maxims. The prohibitionist maxim for worship, that everything is forbidden unless proven otherwise, against the contextualist maxim for worldly affairs, where everything is permitted unless proven otherwise.
But let's add some nuance here. There are some scholars who might lean contextualist. They might see the dinner as fine, but they still advise against it. What's that about?
That's about a very important legal tool called Sadd al-Darai.
Which means?
Blocking the means.
Yeah.
The idea is you prohibit a lawful act because you're afraid it could be a gateway to an unlawful one.
So eating turkey is fine, but it might lead somewhere bad.
Exactly. They worry about assimilation. The fear is, if you open the door to Thanksgiving, how do you close it for Christmas? Or Halloween? It's a strategic move to prevent, a slippery slope. They're trying to protect future generations by drawing a hard line now.
I see. It's a prophylactic measure.
It is. And despite these scholarly debates, the community on the ground has found its own solutions, this kind of third way.
The Islamization of the holiday.
It's a great example of adaptation. It's not just about getting a halal turkey anymore. Organizations like FCNA Relief have totally reframed the day. It's become a day of service. They're out there distributing thousands of meals.
So they're taking a day off and transforming it from a questionable custom into a clear act of worship, ibadah, through charity.
Precisely. They're actively changing the niyya, the intention. And another clever compromise you see is about the timing.
Right. Some scholars suggest not celebrating on the Thursday.
Yes, they'll advise families to have their big gathering on the Friday or the Saturday after. That way you get the family time, you use the day off, but you technically avoid specifying the holiday on its exact day, which sidesteps the imitation issue.
Okay, so we've covered ritual purity, gratitude, custom, but now let's pivot to this emerging third stream of thought, one that moves away from ritual and towards morality. The ethical objectors.
This is a really crucial modern development in Western fiqh, often championed by leaders like Omar Suleiman and institutions like the Akin Institute. They approach it using the maqasid al-Shari'ah, the higher objectives of the law.
And which objective are they focused on?
Justice, edlal. They aren't asking if the turkey is halal. They're asking if the historical foundation of the celebration itself is just.
Okay, so this is a total pivot.
A total pivot.
Mm-hmm.
They argue that for a faith that puts justice at its very core, you can't celebrate a holiday without acknowledging the history of genocide and oppression against indigenous peoples that's tied to it.
So for them, celebrating uncritically
Makes a mockery of gratitude. They argue you can't celebrate a false narrative of peace that papers over historical atrocities. It moves the conversation from a person's individual piety to our collective conscience.
So the problem isn't imitation, Tashabu. The problem is oppression, zulm.
Exactly. And this view urges Muslims to use the day for education and solidarity with indigenous communities. It's about aligning the Muslim conscience with the oppressed Nasr al-Muslim. It forces us to see that our ethics don't stop at the mosque door.
So to synthesize all this for you, the listener, the ruling on Thanksgiving is not about consensus. It is all about methodology.
You have the prohibitionists, who prioritize textual identity, the contextualists, who prioritize local custom and universal gratitude, and the ethical objectors, who prioritize historical truth and justice.
And it's important to point out that the dominant view among scholars actually living in the West, the ones at FCNA and AMJA, is one of conditional permissibility.
That's right. Allowed for family and gratitude, as long as you avoid religious rites and your intention is pure thanking Allah, not celebrating a non-Islamic Eid.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought. We've talked about gratitude, Shukr, and we've talked about justice, adl. If both are non-negotiable requirements of our faith, how do you navigate a day that demands gratitude, but which also masks a history of deep injustice, of zulm?
That really is the ultimate tension, isn't it? Can you truly express thankfulness to the Creator on a day that historically seems to forget justice for the created?
Yeah.
That's the internal moral negotiation that you have to undertake as you approach the holiday season.